Welcome to AP World History Podcast. This is topic 5.2, Nationalism and Revolutions. The essential question from our AMSCO text. What were the causes and effects of the various revolutions in the period from 1750 to 1900, including influence of the Enlightenment and emerging nationalism? So as we're talking about this topic, remember our big topic, our last one, 5.1 on the Enlightenment. You're going to see the Enlightenment. It's going to be a foundation of things you see happening in this topic. And then this topic is going to be a foundation for something that should sound familiar from last year in world history, the Great War, right? We're going to see the pieces of that puzzle are going to start to fall into place. All right. So this theme is continuing, okay? That's what's going on in this topic. You're getting people from all over the world who are in a lower class. They have lower status traditionally. They want a bigger piece of the pie. They don't want to be under somebody's thumb. This is the commonality that we're going to see. So this age of new ideas led to political and philosophical conflicts. So as people are getting more educated, they're learning, they're reading, they're not just buying into either church dogma or the word of the monarchy, like we said in the last podcast. They're starting to question what have been norms that have been oppressing them, right? Maybe God did not put you in charge. Maybe God doesn't want you to be the king or the czar. Maybe it's not God's will that you live a life of luxury and I live in poverty and I have a horrible existence. Maybe that's not God's will. Maybe that's just your will. And that's where people are starting to challenge the status quo. So conservatives, they felt that revolutions were bloody, disruptive, and unlikely to yield positive results. Okay, that's what your AMSCO book says. Now, is that true? Yeah, it is. And no, it's not. All this depends on what side you're on. Well, from what perspective? If you have a nice cushy life and status quo's been working for you, you have a high status and you make plenty of money and you're really not working that hard, you love the way things are. You love the status quo. So this idea of revolution is like, whoa, what's wrong with these people? These people are a bunch of savages. We take care of them. We give them a little. What's their problem, right? But if you're on the other side of that, you're like, this is BS. Why should I have to suffer and work so hard and have nothing to show for it? So, these comments, you got to, always keep in mind the perspective of someone else, even if you don't agree with it. Okay, the desire of common people for constitutional government and democratic practices erupted in revolutions throughout the 19th century. So throughout the 19th century, you're seeing this where people want constitutional government. Why? What does that mean? That means there's a what? There's a constitution like we have here in the United States where everybody has certain rights. Democratic practices, they want to level the playing field. Why should I be stuck at this lower station in life just because you say so? There's a better way. So this concept is just erupting everywhere. And many nations did get a new form of government that responded to this new wave of thinking. And this new wave of thinking had three key ideals. Number one, progress. Number two, reason. Number three, natural law. So these are some of the, overall themes that are going on. That being educated, reading, learning, it's starting to, take form. If you don't apply knowledge, it's useless, right? Well, it's starting to be applied in the form of revolutions. Now, this topic, speaking of revolutions, this should be familiar to you. I'm thinking the American Revolution you learned in grade school and or middle school. Probably not in high school, because 9th grade U.S. history, I think you start at Reconstruction. So these, the American Revolution, you should be somewhat familiar with it. But the ideals that inspired the American Revolution had their roots in European Enlightenment philosophy. The free market ideas are going to trump English mercantilism. No pun intended there. So this idea of a free market. The colonist, right, and this is a good example where I started the podcast about, it's all on perspective. The colonists, they're becoming increasingly independent politically. It was really hard for Great Britain to manage things and run things, and govern the colonies. Why? As a matter of proximity. The Atlantic Ocean, proved to be challenging. As how far can you extend that arm, right? So the colonists are like, man, we're over here. We're over here. We can run our own show. And they kind of been doing it in a lot of ways, even before they're going to gain independence. Colonial legislators, they were already making decisions, usually the decisions that would be made by the British Parliament. With economic and political desires for independence grew a new social spirit. And we talked about this in the last podcast. Think of Adam Smith, think of Thomas Paine. Okay. The Declaration of Independence expressed the philosophy behind the fight of the colonists. So it's all these European philosophies that we talked about in topic 5.1. This is your foundation. And Jefferson picked up the phrase inalienable rights from Locke. And Jefferson, these rights were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Even though that's not exactly what Jefferson wrote originally, but there was a panel of 5 who kind of did some revisions to that before we saw what we know today as a final product. Okay, in the war that followed, the colonists triumphed in 1783 with crucial help from Britain's longtime enemy, France. Now, this is a huge topic. I love studying this topic in grad school, but it's AP World History. We got to keep moving. But understand, with French help and European philosophy is what really sparks the American Revolution. And the perspective from Great Britain, which doesn't get talked about a lot here, is, hey, yeah, we're raising taxes on you, but we have to pay for this French and Indian War. You're expensive. We're paying a lot of your bills for you. You should be grateful to us. And that was their perspective, that the colonists were unappreciative. And that's why you had like a mercantilism, where everything goes to the crown. It was kind of like a parent-child relationship almost in the eyes of the British. But the British are going to have a lot of problems, not just with the 13 colonies. They're going to squash a rebellion in New Zealand in 1872. Then we move over to France in the 1780s. You have cries of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The commoners form a new government body called the National Assembly. Now, this is a crazy thing. We see this all the time. And I think we talked about this last year when we studied Russia, when I taught you guys about, when Alexander III is killed, Nicholas II becomes Tsar, and we talked about, the last Tsar of Russia and the incoming of the Bolsheviks. If you remember that lecture from last year, here we see some very similar numbers. Commoners were 97% of French society. How in the heck is 97% of a nation being controlled by 3%? And don't think this is just history. You could look at this. A lot of people can make the argument it's happening now. But how does that happen, right? Well, again, keeping them uneducated is a great way to do it. Having them fear God is a great way to do it, because you can't police 97% of the population yourself. But if you can get them to be scared that there's a God that's going to punish them if they don't fall in line, It's a nice little trick. The National Assembly is going to begin meeting in Paris, but the king threatens to arrest the leaders of the National Assembly. So what's the point of this National Assembly? Again, different names, but again, very common. We're talking about commonalities is a theme in AP World History. You get a ton of commonalities here. It's the same thing like with the British Parliament, or once the colonies become the United States of America, we're going to have, a Congress made up of the House of Representatives and a Senate. And you're going to have a judiciary branch, right? A legislative branch, an executive branch. There's separation of powers, a balance of power. So you don't have a monarch. You don't have a king or a czar just ruling with an iron fist. On July 14, 1789, a crowd in Paris stormed the Bastille. It was a former prison. It was a symbol of abuses of the monarchy towards the commoners. Peasant uprisings are taking shape. The king was forced to accept a new government with a National Assembly in charge. So here's just yet another example of a monarchy getting their power checked by a governing body that represents the people, right? Okay, the date, July 14, 1789, became French Independence Day. I think we call it Bastille Day, but I don't think they actually call it that in France, strangely enough. Okay, so the most permanent changes were enacted early in the Revolution. The abolition of feudalism, the adoption of the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Your AMSCO text doesn't talk about it, but like the American Revolution, a lot of historians make the argument it really was a catalyst for the French Revolution. So again, you see, you talk about continuity and changes over time. You have the Enlightenment in Europe. These ideas are read by colonists in the 13 colonies like Jefferson and Adams and Franklin and Thomas Paine, and these things get written about, and they start a revolution. Now the action of that knowledge, Enlightenment ideas put into action, the action and the success of the American Revolution goes back to Europe, and it really inspires a lot of the French. The Declaration of the Rights of Man, it was a statement declaring, basic human rights. Louis XVI and the nobility refused to accept the limited monarchy. Right? It's a big blow to their ego. They're used to absolute power, absolute control, right? Absolute monarchy. This led to the forming of the first French Republic in 1792. Then they bring in the Reign of Terror. This is some pretty brutal stuff. A period during which the government executed thousands of opponents of the revolution, including the king and the queen. So you remember that, whatever you call it, the thing, it was like a spin-off of FaceTube, the 10-year challenge I had on Edmodo, and it had the queen, and then 10 years later it was the queen, but her head was gone, and a lot of people didn't get the joke. Well, this is the joke, right? So they break out the guillotines, and they cut their heads off. After a period of turmoil and war, the general Napoleon Bonaparte, who I'm sure you heard of, he's going to become Emperor of France in 1804. Okay, French Revolution, really cool stuff. Again, it's tough to spend so little time on it, but we got to keep moving. Now, this was really cool. I think I taught you this last year, and I think I mentioned it for a DBQ earlier this year. Usually, over the years, whether I'm teaching U.S. history, world history, I always have a section on Toussaint Louverture, and I always start by saying, he's never in the book, the story's never in the textbook. Well, this time, it is in the textbook. So, one more reason why I really like this AMSCO text. On page 287, they actually have a picture of the Black Napoleon, Toussaint Louverture. And he's going to lead a revolt in Haiti. Now, you guys should already know this. I believe I taught this earlier this year and last year, but in 1791. He's going to produce a constitution that grants equality and citizenship to all residents And he's going to declare himself governor for life, so he's getting a little, some of the perks there. But at least temporarily. Haiti enacts land reform. Plantations are divided up. Lands are distributed among formerly enslaved and free black people. And then the French, they're going to imprison him. He's going to die in France in 1803. But he cemented the abolition of slavery in Haiti, which he set on the road to independence from France. Haiti became the first country in Latin America to win its independence. It's the first black-led country in the Western Hemisphere. It's also the only country to become permanently independent as a result of a slave uprising. Now, this is pretty impressive stuff here by the Haitians. And I hate us. There were slaves all over, but slaves used to say, well, at least I'm not a slave in Haiti. Being a slave in Haiti was the worst of the worst. I mean, you got injured, you got hurt, you got sick. They would just let you die and replace you so fast. And I always make the argument, Toussaint Louverture, a lot of historians will argue that the Haitian Revolution and the contributions of Toussaint Louverture, the big moneymaker, millions and millions of dollars were made from the sugar industry in Haiti by the French. This was their cash cow. This is why they had ports in like New Orleans, right? Remember maritime trade? Well, the argument is, if it wasn't for the Haitian Revolution and Toussaint Louverture, Haiti would not have gained their independence from France. If France is still making millions and millions of dollars off of sugar from Haiti, there's no way they're willing to give up the port in Louisiana and New Orleans, which is originally what Jefferson wanted to buy. Because of two things, Napoleon losing Haiti, and he needs to raise money because he's at war in Europe. He's got his problems, and he needs to pay for all this war. So he unloads the greatest real estate deal in human history, and he gives Jefferson the Louisiana Purchase for like $15 million with nut pennies on the acre. Originally, they just wanted the port, just wanted that bottom part of Louisiana. And, Napoleon told Jefferson's guys that came over there, he said, hey, how about the whole thing, man? Because he was going to kind of give it up anyway. He didn't have the manpower, the time, or the finances to stay over there because he needed his full attention and resources back in Europe. So I don't know. I always thought there should be some kind of a plaque or something, an historical marker for the Haitian Revolution and for Toussaint Louverture, because their bravery, their actions, indirectly benefited the United States in the Louisiana Purchase. It was an incredible deal for them, for the U.S. So Toussaint Louverture, very interesting guy. I still don't know if they made a movie on him. They should. Okay, so if we move on here, you're going to see that both the Haitian and the French revolutions grew out of the Enlightenment's insistence that men had natural rights as citizens and that legal restraints were limiting the freedom of people by forcing them into various estates, social classes, whether it's serfdom, slavery, etc., commoner, whatever. In this case, the Haitians, their restraints were a lot more severe. This rebellion was led by slaves. They had no rights at all. So people could say, we don't have many rights. Well, slaves had zero rights. So slaves had it the worst out of anybody. So it kind of even makes this revolution even more impressive in Haiti. Okay, so moving on, next topic. You're going to have Creole revolutions in Latin America. So these same ideas, these revolutionary ideals, are spreading all through Latin America. Creoles are born of European ancestry in the Americas. The Creoles were well educated and aware of the ideas behind the revolutions in North America. Creoles considered themselves superior to mestizos, who were born of European and Indian parents. Colonists who were born in Spain or Portugal, known as peninsulars, felt superior to everyone. So this was like, the pecking order. At the bottom of that pecking order, the bottom of this social ladder, if you will, were the African slaves, the indigenous population, and the mulattoes, those of African and either European or indigenous ancestry. So that was kind of your pecking order there, or your social ladder, as the AMSCO text refers to it. There were many reasons for discontent in the colonies, each of which encouraged some people to desire independence from Spain. Many Creoles were wealthy owners of estates, mines, businesses. They were against Spain's mercantilism, which required colonists to buy manufactured goods only from Spain and sell products only to Spain. Remember we talked about this with Great Britain. So again, everyone kind of looks at it from their perspective, right? It's human nature. So they're looking at it like, hey, this isn't fair. We're being limited here, and this trade, this is imbalanced trade. And again, that's a hot topic in today's politics, right? One of the things President Trump campaigned on, and he went right after, was NAFTA. He said it's an unfair trade balance. So trade balance is an issue, to this day. Creoles wanted more political power. Spain usually only gave important government jobs over here to peninsulars. Mestizos wanted political power and a share of the wealth of the colonies. Many had jobs in the towns or worked in the mines or the estates of the peninsular and the Creoles. So, as you see, everybody wants something, right? Everybody wants, to wet their beak, as they say. Everybody wants a bigger slice of the pie. So these are some of the commonalities going on with based on these enlightened ideas and hearing about revolutions in other parts of the world. Hey, if they can do it, why can't we do it? My group, whatever that group is, my group deserves freedom as well. My group deserves rights. My group deserves an opportunity for upward mobility. So yet Creoles like Simon Bolivar, he continued to push for Enlightenment ideals in Latin America. He's instrumental in the independence of areas that became Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. But the result of the Creole Revolution, it didn't benefit everybody. Again, perspective is everything. When you look at the Declaration of Independence, you look at, whatever, the Constitution, you look at things like, all men are created equal, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. But it doesn't say, there's nothing there about women. There's nothing there about black men or women. Even white, not originally, if you were white and didn't own any land, you were a second-class citizen too. It was about money. But you're going to see a commonality here of people looking out for their group, right? So indigenous peoples in these Creole revolutions, they were disenfranchised from the voting process in many areas, and women did not see increased freedom or rights. So these Creole revolutions are not benefiting everybody. You did have, individuals that were, leading these things and telling people to fight, but not always did everyone benefit. So don't think it was always, everybody got the same amount of newly acquired equal rights and status. Not true. Then there was a Philippine Revolution in 1896. So you're seeing this spread of revolutions everywhere based on the Enlightenment. That's kind of what this topic's about. And this topic closes out, and this is going to segue, this is going to bridge into a much bigger topic. But nationalism and unification in Europe. Nationalism is going to take hold in Europe, France, Italy, Germany. Nationalism also going to spread to the Balkans, the Ottoman Empire. Okay, your wheels should be turning a little bit, maybe remembering a little bit from last year at this point. What are we seeing here with nationalism spreading? Again, what's nationalism? Remember that political cartoon I showed you last year? Like Nazi soldiers are blindfolded, they're being led, but they're being led off of a cliff. Okay, so I don't just throw that word out there. Remember this from last year. Let's make sure we understand what nationalism means. Right? I can just keep talking about it, but it doesn't mean we understand the definition. So according to Doc Webster, nationalism is loyalty and devotion to a nation, a sense of national conscience, exalting one nation above all others and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interest as opposed to those of other nations. A nationalist movement or government opposing a nationalist movement or government. So when you first learn about nationalism, you might kind of think, well, it sounds like patriotism. Well, patriotism, like I come from a patriotic family. My grandfather served in World War II. My dad was in the Air Force. I got uncles that were in the Vietnam War. That's patriotism. You have a flag outside of your house, patriotism. Nationalism can be dangerous. It can be patriotism, on steroids, where not only are you proud of your country, but you think you're better than everybody else. And you kind of get to where nobody else really matters. You're the center of the universe. And again, history is filled with this, right? Again, 500 religions in the world, but don't worry, you picked the right one. All these different races in the world, but of course yours is the best race. All these, your ethnicity, your nationality, well, of course your country's the best, and everybody else is beneath you. So this is a very dangerous mindset, right? So remember the political cartoon from last year. Nationalism got Germany riled up, right? When you buy into nationalism, now you can get into a sense of otherness. Remember we talked about that? Now you can justify anything because everybody else is other. Like they don't count. This is where you get things like, the Armenian genocide and the Great War, the Holocaust and World War II, etc. That you created a sense of otherness through this nationalism. And what did, the book we're just talking about in AMSCO kind of ends with who's buying into nationalism? The Ottoman Empire, right? Who's going to unleash the Armenian genocide during the Great War? The Ottoman Empire. So you see the connection, you see these seeds being planted, and then even if you don't know what's coming up next, you can kind of guess, right? And it's not good. Okay, that's topic 5.2. I'll see you in the next podcast. And remember, these podcasts are just meant to complement the AMSCO reading. It's not meant to replace the reading. So please make sure you're reading the book. Don't be a slacker. All right.